Welcome to Just Thinking. This is Mary Greendale. The title of this show grew out of a lifetime of curiosity about many different subjects. Some local, some global, and some in between. For each show, I will open with my thoughts and then bring on guests to explore the subject in greater detail. I hope the show inspires healthy discussions on camera and among viewers. To me, the sky's the limit when we are just thinking. Hi, welcome to Just Thinking. I'm Mary Greendale. Today we're going to talk about the 8-Arch Bridge. As a matter of fact, the 8-Arch Bridge has been talked about a lot in the last couple of years as we held fundraisers for it and then went to town meeting and got funds from the CPC, the Community Preservation Committee, to do the repairs on the bridge. Unfortunately, there were 7 bids. The lowest of the bids was $644,000. The highest was over $1 million. Our money was around $500,000, a little bit more than that. So the bottom line is we need additional funds. And tomorrow night, that would be the 11th, the CPC will decide whether or not to recommend using additional CPC funds for those repairs. The good news is if that's the route that we go, we've already paid the taxes on that money. It's not like it's a new appropriation. It is just taking money out of savings and moving it over to the historic preservation column. So today we want to discuss that proposal, why it's important, why to care about that bridge. Is it just pretty and just kind of novel and interesting, or does it have some more potential that perhaps we're not thinking of? So with me, I have the town's unofficial, but by now you've got to be official, historian. There's been no competition ever, this would be Joanne Hulbert. And to her left is Robert Weidknecht, who has been working on spearheading, championing, all those wonderful words, the rail trail, for almost 20 years.
Yes, it's been 20 years just this year.
It's been 20 this year. Well, there you go. And how is it going? Well, what's the good news about the trail? Let's start with it.
It's a lot of great news. We just completed the last segment of the surfaces, the stone dust surfaces, all the way to the Sherburne line. And the only piece that we left out was the area around the 8-Arch Bridge to allow the contractors to get in and construct that without disturbing the surface. So we have a little bit of a detour just before the bridge as you're heading from Church Street toward Sherburne to Lowland Street.
And if, in fact, the bridge is not repaired, that detour will become permanent.
That's correct.
Because we cannot allow people to walk over or ride over or whatever the bridge without some sort of railing.
Correct.
So this temporary detour, one of the best reasons for fixing the bridge is so there isn't a detour. But aside from that, so the surface is there all the way now from Sherburne to Milford.
Correct.
That is just great. Congratulations.
6.7 miles.
Congratulations and thank you.
Took a while.
Yeah, it took quite a while, but by gosh, there were many, many times I didn't think you could pull it off, but you did. So thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk about the history of this bridge. This actually officially the Bogastow Viaduct, right? Bogastow Brook Viaduct.
Yes.
Built in 1846-ish?
Well, the first
Why don't we start showing some pictures here, by the way?
Sure.
I've got some historical pictures. They may or may not make sense. But
sure.
We can start looking at them.
Well, the first proposal was printed in 1846.
Okay.
And they had first decided that they were going to maybe go all the way to Woonsocket, and they were really intent on doing that. But apparently, like all of the other projects that we sometimes run into, things became a little shortened, and they only went as far as Milford as it ended up. The old colony actually came into Milford. You had to walk across the street in order to get onto the next line. But the original intention, yes. And now everybody wonders why they spent all that time, energy, and art to make a beautiful arch bridge where the rest had been just graded in. The grade comes up to it, the grade afterwards. Why would they put a bridge in the middle of this? And the reason had to do with water rights, and it had to do with the factories that were on the side of the mill pond.
the other side of the street.
Yes, that's right. And if you do take a little walk down there, you will notice the main waterway, which is there on the left. There is the second waterway, which is in the last arch on the south side of the bridge. But as you can see in one of these pictures here, it appears as though the water goes all the way through. Now, the main waterway that we see today was actually the one that was man-made in order to get all of that water to go into the factories for the water power.
So let's start with this picture. So that's like the Darling Woolen Mill maybe, or something. No, this was earlier than that.
This is earlier than that, yeah.
Right,
Darling came in at about 1902.
Okay, so this is one of the earlier mills. It's right on the side of the pond that we know where the dam is. The dam is shown there. There are no swans or anything in the lake, so it's hard to identify the pond. But anyway, so this was just a hand-drawn map of the entire town, or the downtown. Right. And I just zeroed in on this particular thing.
Yes, it is kind of interesting. You see water going through all of the arches, which is very possible. The smaller of the waterways that you see on the south arch that we see today is probably the old original Bogastow Brook. And you cannot tell a brook sometimes where you exactly want it to go, especially if you want to create some water power. And that's why we have the major one that we see today, where the water flows out of the pond, quite largely. But anyway, we've had a mill or a factory of some sort since the 17th century. This is one of the reasons why people came out this way. We've had a cotton mill, woolen mill. They made thread at
And that's
one point.
a mill?
That's a mill right
Looks
there.
like a castle.
Doesn't it, though? I really like it.
I really like it. But this is standing in the field that we can't access right now, right?
And I recall that field there because actually my family owned that field at one point from the 20s up until the 60s, up to about 70 when we sold. But that's where we used to play. That's where the Woodland Street neighborhood kids, the Orchards, Regal Street, Norland Street, in that area, and Lowland, all of us, that's where we used to play. And it's a lovely field. I'd love to see that all cut back, but, no, just saying.
Just saying.
Just saying, yeah. But anyway, yes, and this would have been after the Darling Mill. This is probably the 1930s, just before the demise of that factory building in 33. And there were a lot of different things that were made there, as I said. Anyway, it was mostly textile in nature, not boots and shoes as it was uptown. But they did use water power. You can see that there were, oh, yes,
that's
okay,
oh, went away.
Yeah, definitely. That's when it went away. Yeah.
Tell your story about you.
Yes, the story that you can just see the chimney there on the left side there of the screen. Just see a little bit of it there. When I was born, I won't say exactly what year it was, but anyway, it does not matter. Many people know. Anyway, in October, when I came home from the hospital, it was the day after. It was a lovely day just like this. Could have been exactly this day for all I know. That my mother was up in the orchards watching everybody picking the apples. We had an apple orchard that was just about where the factory is on Lowland Street now, the large building, the wood factory. But anyway, she looked out towards the arch bridge and could see the chimney that was still there. She looked down at me, and then she looked up, and the chimney was gone. So I feel I have a personal connection with that. You're real attachment with it. But we used to play there.
The chimney collapsed basically by itself.
Yeah, we used to play all around there, on the bridge, under the bridge, behind the bridge,
running across the tracks.
Yes,
dodging the trains.
Yeah,
throwing pennies down to watch the trains.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, all along there.
I didn't do any of those things. I wasn't
Matter of fact, right behind that engine, you can see that the field that's just beyond. That's right about where I was when it happened. But this is a landmark. This is Holliston's probably most notable one that we talk about more than any other in town. We have a few other minor landmarks. You know, the Balancing Rock, that's great. But this bridge has played into Holliston's history, not only like its industrial history, but its connection all the way back to a grist mill in the 1600s. A corn mill that was here because, you know, Bogastow Brook, which actually, if you technically want to look at it, actually starts at Lake Winthrop, comes down like that and goes through. But the major part of Bogastow now is considered to start here at the bridge.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's it's a lovely piece of architecture. You know, why did they do it? Well, the factories really held a lot of power in what could jeopardize, say, their water power, as that was.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at it from, that is the north side where the major stream goes out. We can also see on here the cement edges that are up on top, which, if you go up there now, you can see how much it deteriorates, especially on the east side, which gets less air circulation. So there's a lot more deterioration there. That's one reason why we need to cut back, 30 feet at least.
Well, we've got some pictures that will be coming up that are all about the risks and I'm
also very fearful of seeing plants that are growing out of the cracks, which would be the major reason why it would actually deteriorate and fall down, which is a really huge hazard.
This is actually the Google picture of the trail. This is what if you go,
yeah, and that's a nice contemporary one. It's nice that everything's cleaned out. I know that it's about 30 feet behind it that was actually railroad property, because I do remember the...
Is it 30?
33 feet.
Yes, okay. Give or take 3, right. Exactly. And to move it back and get a little more air circulation, I myself would like that whole triangle completely cleared out. Now, that's just my nostalgic
Well, the problem that we have, and this is part of the problem that we ran into in terms of construction, is you're on a wetland.
Right, yeah.
And in Massachusetts, that wetland is a riverfront.
Right.
Which is, people may find a little bizarre, but so we as a community have to mind all of those laws.
Right.
And so to get on the top of that, and that's the reason I like this one, is to show the top, to get up to the top and deal with that concrete and the coping that was added in the early 1900s.
Probably around 1920. Remember the old cement...
barrier.
The barrier.
It's almost like a Jersey barrier.
That had the 1920 on it.
Which had 1920 on it, and that's probably the last time that there were any kind of renovations that were done there at all.
Well, Robert, why don't you tell us, in terms of the construction, what is it that they're trying to do, or we're trying to do on the top of that?
Well,
you want to go back to that picture?
Yeah, if you can show
Can
the
you
slide
show that
of the
picture again? Because that does show it so well. But we did have to take into account, we couldn't just bring in a crane and park it down there unless we were going to do a whole lot of work in the wetlands to remediate whatever we were doing.
Right. That would involve quite a bit of substantial construction costs there as well, because you would have to cover over the surfaces of the ground down below if you wanted to try to work from below with the crane. And some of the costs that we ran into are the costs of bringing in precast concrete sections to replace the concrete cap that's on the top there now. But basically that concrete cap has been falling apart since 1920 and is allowing water to go down through the joints of the cracks of the concrete and then through the joints of the granite bridge itself, and it's leached out a lot of the mortar in that mortar mix. And so what we needed to do is to cut off basically their wings on the sides of this concrete cap, cut off that cap, put in a new precast concrete slab on the top, and then put railings up on top of that. And you can see in the photograph there's a lot of vegetation that's growing in the joints of those. So or I won't say all of it, but most of the masonry joints have been leached out, and so there's gaps in there, which is allowing water penetration and vegetation to get in there.
Let's back up one slide, because that picture, that white efflorescence that's showing there, we probably will never get off. I think that it's safe to say the cost to get that off, we found, was mega thousands, mega hundred thousands. But the point is that it is building up on the side of the stone, and it is in and of itself in some places a foot thick. And one of the engineers and I took an axe to it, and a pickaxe, and just chipped and chipped, and I saved a little piece for my desk. But it is thick lime deposit, basically, that's just built up there. So we're not even able to see the granite in many of these places because of this lime that's leaching down and disfiguring it like this. Now, the disfigurement is one thing. The issue is the water and pushing any kind of moisture in there and
freezes.
And when it freezes and temperatures change, it can, go back and forth, or roots can get in and push it aside. And that's the coping at the very top. This is one of the places that, where water's going. But the thing is that these bridges are not mortared together for their structural capacity. They are keystone arches, which means that they are held together by gravity. And so if anything should affect the keystone at the top, or now I've forgotten what they call those at the bottom.
I don't know.
Oh, I do know. It'll come back. But at any rate, if the cornerstone, there's another word. But either one of those should shift at all, the tunnel, the whole arch collapses.
And when arch goes, they'll all go. Actually,
they're probably pretty dependent. I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't know that, but I would say I don't want one of them to go
in order to test that principle. Yeah,
it would sort of spoils the whole thing.
Right.
So anyway, the goal is to get that coping on the top replaced, but because we were going to have to do that without using cranes and it meant that we were going to use more people power, and so it was going to be a slower process. And that may have cost us a little bit more in the construction, but it doesn't cost us more in the end, because what we would have had to do for mitigating the wetlands would have been, I'll bet you, many more dollars more than what we're going to do for that, for the process we're going to use. I mean, because there was no way, not aside from covering the wetlands, then removing any debris and making sure you're catching it all and all of the rest of that, the dam wouldn't support getting a crane down there.
And there's also an old bridge just east of the existing Woodland Street Bridge, and that bridge is ready to fall down at any point now. It's got wood structures, wood members, and so that needs to be protected as well. You cannot drive a crane over the top of that in order to access the lower part of the 8-arch bridge. And
so the project would have gone from being, total of $644,000 to, who knows? One plus, that's sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But then, okay, so we know that there's history here. We know that it was important to the town for its economy.
Right.
It brought people, the Irish, the Italians, and so forth.
Right.
It brought workers. It brought, obviously, business, because the mills needed it all the way along. It's just not the woolen mill there. It was the Water Street mills and all the way.
All the way through. Sure. That's where our boots and shoes, including at the time just before the Civil War, right afterwards, straw hats went out by train. Produce went out by train. Produce came in by train. Passengers, commuters, even in the end, up until 1959. It was used. It was a major route between Milford and Framingham in Boston. There were many people who moved out to Holliston knowing that they had that the transportation access. Before, it would be a whole day's trip to get into Boston. Now it was only a couple of hours at the very most. It was a huge boon for people. Yes, it did bring a lot of people. It's the great story of the arrival of the Irish, because they were the main workers that worked on the rail. Yeah, the thing is, when you realize in 1846, 47, 48, 48 is when we finished to Holliston, and then they finished the rest of the year. 47, we got down to the where the depot is, but there was still a heck of a lot of work, and the worst part of it for Holliston from beyond that. So you get into 1848 by the time that they get through the cut. The thing is that remember, that was all done by hand. There were no big steam shovels, there were no bulldozers, and all of that equipment that we think of today as being essential was not there. It was pickaxes, it was wagons, it was people that were digging up dirt and forming the grade that went all the way to Milford. That's where the tough part of the whole project was. Yes, they did mention about the Lovely Bridge. They also mentioned about the grade. The tough part was going there by Highland Street, where we have now the tunnel and all that. But But this one here is such a piece of art. I mean, you know, all right, people talk about how, well, we can't afford art. Well, yes, we can. And we can afford art. We can afford to save one of our greatest landmarks in town that we have ever had. It is a great piece of architecture. And as you have mentioned in the past about how there's photographs of this bridge at the Smithsonian.
Yeah, the Library of Congress.
Yes, and the Library of Congress as well, where they keep all of this stuff on file so that we can remember it. But I don't want to remember it in pictures or have to see it there. It's here. It's a really great piece of art as well as architecture, science, engineering. Yes, engineering. Yes.
Yep. The archives that it is in is the area of the architectural. They hired photographers to go around the country to take photographs of the most important, most significant architectural and engineering feats of the time.
Right.
And so, you know, we happened to, that bridge got in there. Now, I mean, I have no idea how that bridge got in there. Who nominated it? How did they know it was there? All that stuff.
Because it's so off the beaten track.
I know.
Right. Yeah.
But
how
still,
did they know?
it would be curious to figure that out. But there it was as the underpinnings for Holliston at that time. Now, before we came on the air, you were talking about the cost.
Yes, the cost for the whole project and everything. It was all figured out right down to the penny, literally. Bridging, which included major work on the one that we're talking about, but also a few of the smaller bridges. There are 3 arch bridges along the line, just the single arch bridges. Of course, the one at Arch Street in Mudville. There's another one just beyond Chestnut Street, and then there's another near South Street, which is kind of obscure. There's a couple of little underpasses, cement underpasses going towards East Holliston. Those were added later, by the way. But bridging for the original project came to $25,437.76. Now, I'm sure the major portion of that was probably the large 8-arch bridge. Superstructure, $122,783.67. The stations only came into about $17,000. Lands that they had to take was $27,000. Herman Leland really made out with $8,000 for his farm, which is about where Central Street and around there. His house was also taken by eminent domain, ended up on Railroad Street, and was one of the corporation buildings. You know, they maintained buildings all along the way. So, you know, the working expenses that they started out with was only $16,790.61. And the entire project was a total of 11.969 miles for the whole thing from Framingham down into Milford. So I think it was a pretty good project for the money we got.
And considering how long
it's lasted. And also, I would think that probably $25,000 for the bridges and everything. How it would compare today, is it about the same amount of money that we need to spend in order to save it? Yeah, it probably equals out to that.
So let's talk about today. So right now, Holliston's pretty well built out. You know, it's getting to the point where most of our land has already been built on or can't be built on, or we've set it aside for open space. We've done that with 20% of our land. So with that in mind, there comes a point at which you don't get any additional revenues from new buildings. You don't pick up new taxes with new growth. So it strikes me that it's time for Holliston to become a little bit visionary and start to think about all of the ways in which it can generate revenues that aren't strictly dependent upon the property tax. Otherwise, you know, schools and services suffer eventually because the costs are only going up. We know they're not going to go down. So looking at the rail trail, which, Robert, I know that you've done a fair amount of not necessarily research, but you've come across a fair amount of information about the economic development benefits of doing these kinds of projects in communities. Tell us about what you've heard and the experiences you've seen.
Well, I've seen it as when my daughter was growing up. I used to travel every weekend and go to different rail trails throughout the area, and I'd go into Canada and to New York and all that, and even when we went to the American Bloom down in Florida, one of the towns in the downtown of Winter Park,
Winter Park, yeah.
And they basically had renovated the downtown. The downtown disappeared when all the suburban shopping malls all occurred, and so the shopping in downtown disappeared. And so in order to get that back, they reinstituted or converted the rail bed to a multi-use trail, and that brought a lot of people back. And so now you have restaurants, now you have the theater was renovated, and,
yep.
and all this development. I see that all over the place where tourism around rail trails occurs all the time. There are groups of people that just go from rail trail to rail trail, like I was doing every weekend. And so you frequent restaurants, you go to beer halls and whatever, and you hear about it up in Marlboro, the Hudson. There's the flatbread company is developed right on the trail, and that's it owes its economic benefits to having the rail trail there. And so I see this all the time where economic development develops around a particular tourist industry, and rail trails are a good part of that. And I see that happening already now.
Coffee Haven, so.
I talk with people. I talk with people along I see along the rail trail, and they're coming in from all different areas all the time.
Well, walking along it, I have run into people from surrounding towns. I remember during the AIB the other day, there was a man from Medway who was walking along. I mean, it's a very busy thoroughfare all the time. Yeah. And I think it's one of Holliston's great attractions, and it's also something that really brings a lot of people together all along the way. Plenty of room for other things along the way too, and I think that we should keep adding to it. But he was walking along and he's looking around and said, "My goodness, I never knew this was here. Never knew it. This is amazing." It's easily accessed by other towns around, anyway from Hopkinton and Milford, and now Sherburne will probably have little access routes to get into it, and we'll start seeing people coming down that way, and they're going to be coming right down to the bridge.
Yeah, and they're going to, and at the moment they're going to detour the bridge.
Yeah,
and if we don't fix it, they will continue to detour the bridge. And then when the bridge starts to collapse, they'll be able to see the collapse as they're passing
it. That's terrible.
I know that is
that's terrible. That very thought of it is just nightmarish.
But so in addition to the economic development of that itself, I happen to think we've got lots of other trails in town. So if you've come here to ride on trails, or you happen to be the kind of person who likes to do birding, I'll tell you, I know from playing up on top of the bridge, it's a good little spot for birding in the spring and in the fall. Yes. There's water there, and that's what attracts birds when they're in migration. And so you find a lot of different things flying through, and they are only traveling. They're not going to stay here. They're just dropping off for a drink. It's their bar. And
that's right.
So I mean, what about attaching some of these? Are there ways that any of these link?
Well, they definitely link, and one of the great benefits of extending it to the Sherburne line, as you talk about birding, there's a heron rookery in the woods there.
Yes,
and all the woods have
died
by the beaver dams, and now all those nests are up in there. So that's opened a lot of things, and I've pointed that out to some people that I've seen walking up that direction. But also there are connections to the New England Mountain Biking Association owns some land it's sort of sandwiched off of the Milford section of the Milford's Trail, but it's in the western part of Holliston, and they own.
The Fairbanks, is that near the Fairbanks?
Adjacent to the Fairbanks. There's the Fairbanks, the town forest. Milford has conservation land, and NEMBA owns their own parcel, and so they've created a network of trails, and they get a lot tourism. tourism.
And what kind of bikes are those?
Those are mountain bikes. New England Mountain Biking Association, NEMBA. Not real. I mean, there are people that use these real fat tires now, but the typical mountain biker uses maybe a couple inch wide.
Well, there is another very important trail that comes right off of the rail trail.
Pout Lane.
Pout Lane, that's right. Walk in the footsteps of the Native Americans on the pathway that wended its way from South Natick out to Mendon and Grafton. And we have a piece of that trail which connects right up to the rail trail.
Is there a sign at that one?
There's a big message board there.
Bobby's little white sign.
I don't think it's a little. I don't think it's a Blair sign, but there's a big message board, and it's very apparent. It's between Cross Street and Summer Street, and it's quite obvious right by the stream. And we do have stories about how Native Americans would wend their way along there, and it was the custom of them that if they got to a certain point on their walk and it got late, that they would just pile into any place that would accommodate them. For instance, the house that you see when you come up the trail onto the rail trail, right on the rail bed there, and you look straight ahead. This was a very popular spot for the Native Americans to stop over at night. Now, they would not ask. Well, they might be nice about it. They didn't harm anyone. But they would pile into your house and just settle down onto your floor.
Well, let's remember, they didn't believe anybody owned
anything, right? And it was all to be shared, right? And so they would just pile right in there, and it became an expectation that if you lived along the pathway, that this was likely to happen. And there are stories about this happening even at the time of the Revolutionary War, because the soldier who was off in Cambridge had decided to sneak back for the weekend, see how things were going at home, and it was a little late when he got home, and he tried to get into the door. And he couldn't get in there. Something was keeping the door shut. He couldn't get in there. So he couldn't figure out what was going on. So he goes around to the side, and he takes a handful of pebbles and he throws them up to the window to wake up his wife. They slept up in the loft of the house, which was a custom of the time. And she sticks her head out the window and says, "Why can't I get in the door?" And she says, "Well, there's a whole bunch of Indians sleeping on the floor." And he says, "Oh, okay, all right." So he goes around, gets a ladder, climbs up into the window in the loft, and settles in for the night. And this was very common. It happened in several locations if you were along Pout Lane. So you can walk along the pathway, and there are some strange little, like, sites and things, questionable little piles of stone and holes in the ground and everything that we still don't even know what they're all about.
Well, but that raises the whole point. Maybe we generate some interest in people who know that stuff or care about it.
And it's a very small pathway. The reason is because Native Americans walked single file, and they left very little print on the ground.
Yep.
But we do know that it was there, and we know from history that they did stop at this house and a couple of others along the way as well. And they would get up in the morning, and they would be off on their way, none the worse for wear on either side.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think that those kinds of things, geocaching's another thing. Our open space would be, I know that there are some folks who've used it, but
they're currently out there today. I run into it every once in a while. I'll find
some little
treasures along the way.
Yeah. That's right. So, but marketing the whole, I know people, there are so many people that think I'm crazy, but that's okay. Shoot me now. I can just picture this as being, everybody lives in the city, they like having their parks and stuff, but they want to get out into the out of doors. Here we are. Yeah. We've set aside 20% of our land. If we're not going to get taxes for it, let's see if we can find some other way to, to get money for it.
That's right.
And so that we can maintain the lifestyle we've chosen while they maintain the lifestyle they've chosen, Yeah.
I think it would be great all the way along the line, especially in the commercial area, to encourage the people who have properties and places there to encourage some more commercial ventures along the way.
Yep.
I think that would be really great.
Yep, and that the fellow, who would have thought that Grace Bicycles would have ended up with a bicycle trail right in his backyard,
Exactly,
He was, talk about location.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's see if we can look at the pictures of things today. One of the other places that I think is like the building that's right at at Exchange Street, the old factory that's Exchange Street, John Gagnon owns.
Oh, yes.
That one I picture as a restaurant.
We have fantasized about that.
The second floor from the trail.
Seriously, Seriously. Seriously.
With a great outside cafe on the, we have talked with him so many times. If he knew what we were doing now, I'm sure he would be, oh my gosh.
No, I've said it all to him.
Oh,
I have.
Yeah,
I have.
That's
okay,
right.
So what other pictures have we gotten? This is basically what it looks like today. This is Robert. I put that in there because this is something. Let's just toss it out there as an idea that, okay, why wouldn't we light it at night, at least in the early evening where it might be of some interest? Sure. Now, we know that there are some folks in the conservation world that say that you can disturb the wildlife, the habits of the wildlife and so forth. So we don't leave it on all night. You know, I don't want to disturb them. But a few hours in the evening, nice summer. Come on, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah. You converted me, Robert.
If you ever go online, there's a beautiful bridge down in Pennsylvania in the Johnstown area where they have a similar bridge like that, and they have a multi-million-dollar light show on it. I'm not saying for Holliston, but you know, just to have a light, nice glow on it.
A glow.
Nice fall picture. Keep going. We'll see what else we've got in this one. I honestly don't remember. Yeah, you can just skip through these.
March. Looks like March.
Yep, there's the top of the bridge again. Yeah. I'm not sure how I did that, but okay. But I do think that that's a good shot of just exactly what has to happen. You're going to put the new coping. Oh, here's the dam. This is the reason we can't just drive a truck across this.
Right.
You know, this is the dam that goes from the pond across the street, and you can see it's made out of wood, and it is rotten as rotten can be.
That's the old Woodland Street there.
Yeah, and
they took out the curb because it was practically a 90-degree turn.
Yep.
There, that you would have to go come down the hill in a roadway around the corner. That's why they did put that in there.
And that was the hurricane in 2005. The downtown was horrifying. This is when East Holliston was up to its knees in water. It's when Houghton's Pond completely flooded into Dunkin' Donuts. This was just horrific, but this is the stuff that could really, really hurt that bridge if, again, we do allow it to weaken in any way. Heavy water, heavy rain getting into those bottom corner post keystones, you know, would be a bad thing. Oh, I apologize. I left that one in there again.
Oh, but that's
I must really like that picture. You know, okay. But going back to the economic development, Robert, is there anything that is there anything specific that people have done that we need to think about sort of long term? Are there bylaw things that they do? I know you've talked about the wayfinding signs and that kind of stuff that they do. What else is it? How do you build these plans around it?
Well, there is actually the Rails to Trails Conservancy has what they call a Trail Town guidebook, where in order to promote this type of economic development for towns, and they do it down in Pennsylvania quite effectively. And so what they do is I could send it to you, the Trail Town guidebook, where they give you ideas on how to establish, you know, the corridor itself. You know, you got to have good parking. You have to have reason to bring people there. And so if it's for trails, if it's for bird watching, or if it's brew pubs, that's another popular one.
Oh, yeah.
Restaurants and a lot of what happened in Arlington. I spoke to the town planner many years ago about how the town of Arlington turned around as a result of the Minuteman Trail going through there. And so all those restaurants redeveloped in that downtown area. So you can start to get those restaurants, and obviously we have a sewer issue and having to deal with that. But
we don't over there, do we really? Because we know that we can run
piping
lines
plant
all the way down to the treatment plant at the schools. And so there is really no excuse not to at least engage in that conversation. So anyway, that will definitely be one of the other things that we'll be talking about. Now I also have a folder of some artwork that the kids have done and other people. These are just a few little shots that during the last year when we were raising funds for the bridge, this was the elementary school that did these pictures, and we got, oh God, I can't remember how many. It was over 100, 150, but these were just little kids' impressions of that 8-arch bridge. So I wanted to share those with folks. this is something else. We had the schools actually integrated history into this conversation with them, and one of them was about. Oh gosh, I can't remember. In the art class, they were teaching them about perspective and stuff, and what better way than the end of a bridge? You stand on one end of it, and you can kind of see the tracks riding off into Never Never Land. But at any rate, so this is something that Connor Plunkett did for me, or for himself, but I mean he shared with me. I mean, that's just cool. I mean, those are great greeting cards, or they could even be the wayfinding sign. Who knows? But they do give that impression anyway. And this was a rendering that was done by what's her Tate, Samantha Tate. This was her interpretation. Again, she was a high school student. She's now down at Rhode Island School of Design for obvious reasons.
Right,
okay. Yeah, she has a life. Now, these were the pictures that we actually had done that we sold as part of the auction. And up in the upper right-hand, Liz Ricketson did that one that was in a watercolor. And then over on the left, we have David Bastile's that we had made into the posters. And there are all kinds of them there. Barbara Lush did a cute little one that was on an etching in copper. It was a fun project. It was an opportunity for people to use some real creativity, and we made some serious money on that one for the committee. By the way, that committee still has about $20,000 sitting in its fund, and so at some point along the way, I'm sure that there will be something that we will contribute that to, in terms of trying to get, to use it. Maybe again, the wayfinding signs, or the lights, or the whatevers. But think we've left anything out here? Are we solid on the fact that this needs to be done and needs to be done now?
What are the alternatives? Allowing it to fall?
There are none.
Allow it to fall down.
You can't do that.
And the good news is the money is already there. It's not like we have to reappropriate. It's not we're not going to be taking anything that you haven't already spent. It is basically a savings account that we did for historic preservation, affordable housing, and open space.
So the bridge, along with the rail trail, is an integral part of Holliston's social life now. It's part of our legacy. It's part of our history. It's our important contribution to architecture and art.
And it could be part of our future.
Yes, exactly. I think the rail trail has been such a boon to the town. We owe it to the bridge to keep it up.
We owe it to the bridge.
Yes, we owe it to the bridge.
All those Irish immigrants.
Yes, every single one of them.
That was chipped away by hand.
And every little load of dirt that it took to bring that grade up, to bring it over that water site, everything about it, all of the people who came here and stayed. A lot of the reasons why the Irish came here and stayed, I mean, they could have moved on with the project, had to do with building the bridge, had to do with the grade, had to do with the railroad. And as each time that the work came to a delay or slowed down, they would settle in. And that's why we have Mudville. That's why there was a little enclave that is up by South Street, because things slowed down at certain points, and why there was a huge Irish population in Milford. A lot of them ended up at that destination and didn't move on because the project stopped at Milford instead of going to Woonsocket as they had originally considered doing. And the thing is, why there wasn't a little bit of a village coming down like through Sherburne or Ashland area was because there wasn't a delay there. They didn't have to grade as much coming through there until they got to Holliston. And then what we did was we reaped the benefit of that by having an Irish population that stayed here because it's right before the tunnel. That's where Mudville got set up. because
and it's
people
still
didn't move.
30% of our population, the Irish are.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
It's
that's
good.
right.
And the Italians are like 20%.
20%, sure. And the Italians also helped with the quarrying.
Yep.
And that's what,
it all came from, that's the other thing.
That's
the granite
right.
comes from here. Some of it from the ledges down at Goodwill.
Yes,
and then
that's
the
right.
pink granite from
up in
Milford.
in Milford. That's right. And it all came in there. You can see, if you walk into the woods all along from Holliston on down through Milford, you can see where there was a little bit of quarrying here. They pulled whatever they could find,
Sure.
practically by the side of the grade there.
Well, when you talk about the grade, I remember the New Year's Eve that we first set up out at
Yes.
on the rail trail for that
Right.
first frozen night.
Yes.
When you're on the trail and looking down into Mudville, that's a lot of fill.
That's impressive.
That's
what
a
they
big,
did.
long drop.
And they did it all by hand
Yeah.
with push cuts of dirt and pickaxes and who knows what's underneath that grate as well, you know.
Oh.
Yeah, it said, you know, the completion of the residue of the track has been retarded by a deep and difficult cut. We know where that is. The work of which could not be advantageously hastened, and it is yet unfinished. And that was in May of 1848. But by July 4th of 1848, they at least made it a little bit further, and then by the end of it, in the late 1848, they finally made it all the way to Milford, because after they got through the cut, and you notice the grade is not as steep or as dramatic from that point on.
Right.
But that is the one thing that they mentioned also. They mentioned the bridge, but they also mentioned the grade, especially from about Mudville to Highland Street.
Absolutely.
That was the big deal that they were talking about. But they did not stop off, mess up that water that they had to have coming through for the factories there at Mill Pond. They didn't mess that up, but that was one of the big deals that they had to contend with in order to appease what was going on with the factories, and then also they had to work with that grade. And it's really something, especially when the leaves are off the trees and you walk along that grade. And you realize you're up at the top of the trees.
Yeah,
you're at the top.
That's why it makes good
Yes.
birding. Because that's where the little birdies are,
That's
too.
where the birds- oh, yeah, absolutely.
You do that in May and September.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
I appreciate your help with this. I'm going to say a few words on, oh, wait a minute. You know what we didn't show was your new brochure and map.
Oh,
That was a really
yeah.
handsome
Yeah.
piece. This is the new
Yes.
Upper Charles Rail Trail for Holliston, and it has, tell us about it.
Well, this just it's a flyer for people coming from out of town.
Do you
and
keep
who
it at
needs a little
the
more.
kiosk?
We do have some folded up into that kiosk if we can keep them supplied. We also provide them at Town Hall. They're available right outside the town clerk's office. But that shows the new map. That's the purple and magenta color. Shows all the surfaces as stone dust, and it shows the green in Milford as all paved trail. And so when you look at the guide on the left, and there's also in very small lettering is the distances. So many people ask me, what's the distance from this point to this point? And so we included the sub-incremental distances from various segments. But it basically shows the magenta is all through the entire part of town, 6.7 miles, except for the detour right there at Bogastow Brook.
And that's the little yellow blob there, right there.
Yet to be done. It's about a quarter-mile and a quarter-mile detour until we finish this project.
All right. Well, then for sure we're going to be showing this map around town.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
So, I'm going to do my closing. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. So, there's no denying that I am a proponent of repairing this bridge and funding this request. The bridge is our history, but I also see it as our future. If we allow this bridge to continue to decay and make bicyclists detour around it, I believe we will be killing our only golden goose. I believe with all my heart that Holliston needs new revenue streams for the future. You may not realize that we are nearly built out. And while that may sound good, it also creates a desperate financial situation for us. Costs will go up just to maintain our current services. If there is no new growth, we will face overrides repeatedly. No new buildings mean we get no new tax dollars. Our businesses are only 14% of all our tax revenues, firmly placing the burden on residential payers forever. We have very little industrial and commercial land to develop. But we may have some opportunities for careful redevelopment downtown that it can attract new businesses. And the rail trail, other trails, the community farm, and the golf course can all provide tourist escapes for people in the inner city who want a day in the country. And the 8-Arch Bridge is a big part of that. The bridge is a great place for birding. Photographers love to take photos on that bridge, and there has been at least one marriage proposal up there that I know about. I see that bridge icon as the symbol on signs directing people around town to various outlets for food, bike repairs, golf, swimming, hiking, geocaching, etc. We have paid the taxes already. We set aside the money in our savings account, and I am hoping people will vote to use those savings to plot our future's economic stability so we can continue to enjoy our great lifestyle, our great schools, and our wonderful hometown by repairing this bridge. Please attend town meeting on October 30th and support the additional funding to get this bridge restored. Thank you. Thank you to you guys again. All right, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Okay.